Wind across a red mesa. The high desert breathes under a sky the color of old steel. A cracked ribbon of asphalt threads through the juniper, leading nowhere a map remembers. Out of that, nothing rises a vast streamlined modern motor lodge, half swallowed by 40 years of morning glory vine. A drowning crown of purple on a white stone tower. A clock with four faces, all of them stopped at the same hour. 2:47. A rusted Ford van crawls under the great parabolic arch. Inside, an old woman grips the wheel with arthritic hands. Four children press against the windows. $3 in her cardigan pocket, a deed against her chest. Somewhere in the juniper, a black SUV waits in the trees. Headlights blink once, then dark. Three sets of diesel engines wake in the distance. The neon bluebird above the arch stays unlit, still diving, still falling. She steps out of the van. The rain came sideways that night, not falling, driving. Each drop a cold needle pressed into the seams of an old Ford Econoline parked beneath the broken yellow eye of a streetlight that had been dying since October. Lavinia Bromwell folded her hands inside the sleeves of a cardigan the color of dried lavender. She did this to hide the swelling. The arthritis had eaten the knuckles of her right hand until they looked like polished river stones. She did not want the children to see. She was 68 years old. She had spent her whole life believing that the world owed nothing to anyone, and the world had agreed. Behind her in the gutted belly of the van, Reeve sat against a wall of stacked grocery bags. He held an open biology textbook. Used. 22 cents at the Goodwill on Rainier Avenue. The pages smelled of someone else's basement, and the spine had been broken so many times that the bonds of the cellular membrane diagram now lived on a different page each week. He held a small flashlight in his teeth. 17 years old, already the man of a family that had no roof. Tobin slept beside him. 15, hollow-cheeked, wrapped in an army surplus sleeping bag that had once belonged to a man Lavinia did not know. She had bought it for $9 at an estate sale 3 months back, and that $9 had cost them a week of bus passes. Marin was awake. 14, she was always awake. She held the corner of an architecture magazine someone had thrown into a recycling bin near the King County Library. She was studying a photograph of the Chrysler Building's crown. She did this every night, as if the act of memorizing a beautiful thing would one day let her build one. And Posey. Posey was 10. Posey slept in the cradle of Lavinia's lap, and her small forehead burned where it touched Lavinia's thigh. The fever was the thing Lavinia could not look at directly. $3 in her pocket. A bottle of children's ibuprofen at the Bartell Drugs 3 blocks east cost $6. The van rocked when the wind hit it broadside. The metal groaned the way old metal does when it has nothing left to give. Lavinia listened. She had become very good at listening to things that were almost finished. Aunt Vinnie. Marin's voice was a whisper that did not want to wake the others. Her cheeks are red. I know, sweetheart. Should we drive somewhere? Where would we drive? Marin did not answer. Marin was 14, and Marin had been smart enough since the age of 7 to understand the shape of impossible questions. 8 months. 8 months since the apartment on Beacon Hill. 8 months since Lavinia's pension had been swallowed whole by Posey's pneumonia bills and a landlord who had raised the rent by $400 on the same Tuesday. Her sister Verity's life insurance check finally ran dry. Verity. Lavinia could still smell her sister sometimes. Vanilla extract on the wrist. Cedar from the closet. 5 years gone now. A 2-lane highway outside Yakima. A semi-truck driver who had not slept in 31 hours. Verity and her husband Linus dead before the ambulances even left the station. 4 children. 4. Lavinia had signed the adoption papers in a Spokane courthouse with her own arthritic hand. She had been 63 years old. The judge had asked her off the record if she understood what she was taking on. She had said yes. She had not understood, not really, but she had said yes. She had said yes the way you say yes to a tide that is already rising at your ankles. She had said yes because the alternative was a state foster system she had spent 38 years watching swallow children whole. She had said yes because Verity had been her younger sister, and Verity had asked her once on a porch in Spokane in the summer of 2018 if she would ever consider being a guardian. Verity had been laughing when she asked it. Verity had asked it the way a healthy woman in her 40s asks questions about a future she expects to live to manage herself. Lavinia had said yes then, too. She had said yes the way you humor a sister. 3 years later, the semi-truck, the two-lane highway, the phone call at 7 in the morning. Now the rain drove sideways, and Posey's fever climbed, and $3 sat folded in a pocket that smelled of mothballs and someone else's sorrow. A knock at the driver's side window. Sharp. 3 times. Lavinia jolted. Posey whimpered. Marin went still as a caught rabbit. A man stood outside. A tall man. A coat that cost more than this entire van. Charcoal cashmere. An umbrella like a black flower opened against the storm. He did not belong on this street. He did not belong in this decade. Lavinia rolled the window down a single inch. Mrs. Bromwell. Who's asking? My name is Royce Mitford. I'm a private investigator retained by the law firm of Crispin, Voss, and Eldridge. He slipped a card through the crack, cream-colored, thick, the kind of card that took 2 seconds to print and 20 years of leverage to earn. Your father has died, Mrs. Bromwell, 3 days ago. You are required to attend the reading of his will tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The rain kept driving. Lavinia did not move. She could feel the card in her fingers. She could feel her own pulse in the place where her wedding ring used to be before she had pawned it 18 months ago for the down payment on a security deposit that the landlord had then refused to return. Her father, Cornelius Vandermeer. 42 years she had not spoken his name out loud. 42 years since she had stood in the marble lobby of his Madison Park estate and told him that she would not give up teaching 7-year-olds to read in order to manage his evictions. 42 years since he had looked at her with the same flat calm with which he looked at quarterly reports and said the words she had carried in her chest like a stone ever since. You are dead to me. She had walked out. She had never written. He had never written. And now he had died, and a man in a charcoal coat had found her on the worst street in the worst night of her 68th year on this earth. I don't want anything from him, she said. Her voice was smaller than she had meant it to be. With all due respect, Mrs. Bromwell, it is not a request. Mitford did not blink. His eyes were the color of the gravel under a freight yard. Frankly, given your current living situation, I would advise you to attend. He looked briefly into the dark cavity of the van behind her. He saw Posey. He saw the fever in her cheeks. His face did not change. 9 a.m., the address is on the card. He turned. He walked back into the rain. A black town car waited at the curb. Lavinia had not seen it pull up. She was usually so good at noticing. The taillights bled away into the storm. She held the card in her hand for a long time after. Reeve climbed forward into the front. He had taken the flashlight from his teeth. His face was very grown up. Aunt Vinnie? I'm fine, sweetheart. You're not fine. No. Are you going? She looked at the card. She looked at Posey's red cheeks. She looked at the $3 bills in her cardigan pocket. I'm going. She did not sleep that night. She watched the rain. She thought of her father's hands. They had been very long-fingered and very cold, and they had always smelled faintly of the leather of his briefcase. She had loved those hands when she was 7 years old. She had hated them by the time she was 26. He was dead now. Both of those things had stopped mattering. She thought, too, of her mother. She had not let herself think about her mother in a very long time. Her mother had been a quiet woman, a pianist who never played professionally, a reader of Russian novels, a woman who had died of a brain aneurysm in 1991 in the kitchen of the Madison Park house at the age of 58 while reading the Sunday New York Times. Lavinia had not gone to the funeral. She had been 33 years old. She had been 7 years into her teaching career. She had been 7 years into not speaking to her father, and her father had told the housekeeper to tell Lavinia not to come. And Lavinia, who had been thinking she might come anyway, had heard that and had not come. She had regretted it for 35 years. She regretted it again now in the dark of the van, in the cold of the November rain. The thing about regret, she had learned, was that it did not actually want to be solved. It wanted to be carried. It wanted to be carried gently and acknowledged and set down for a little while when the carrying got too heavy and then picked up again. It was not a problem. It was a small, dark animal that traveled with you for the rest of your life. At dawn, she walked 3 miles through a city that did not know her name. The arthritis in her hips made each block its own private war. She wore her one clean dress, a faded floral she had bought at a Salvation Army in 2019 for $2, and a cardigan with a small moth hole at the left elbow that she had tried to mend with a thread that did not match. The glass tower stood at the corner of 4th and Madison, 62 stories of coal-black mirror. She watched her reflection ride up the side of it as she crossed the street, and her reflection looked like a woman someone had forgotten on a bench. The lobby smelled of money. There is a smell. It is not perfume. It is the absence of stress. It is the silence of carpet under your shoes when the carpet is 1 inch thick and somebody else paid for it. She gave her name to a woman behind a desk who did not look at her. She was sent to the 62nd floor. The elevator was paneled in walnut. There was a sprig of fresh white orchids in a small ceramic vase bolted to the wall, and the orchids were real, and Lavinia stared at them all the way up and thought about how somebody had paid somebody else to drive across the city every Monday to change the flowers in an elevator nobody loved. The conference room had 3 walls of glass. Seattle spread below it in a slate-gray sprawl. The Puget Sound looked like a sheet of dirty foil. "Mrs. Bromwell." A man rose from the head of the table. He did not extend a hand. "I'm Bartholomew Crispin, please." He gestured. She sat. He was 60, slick silver hair, a suit the color of charcoal smoke, a tie that was probably worth a month of Lavinia's expired rent. His face was a face that had been arranged carefully in a mirror many years ago and had not been unarranged since. He did not offer her coffee. He did not offer her water. He opened a leather folder. "Your father's estate," he said, "is valued at $450 million. The number did not register at first. It was a string of syllables. 450 million. Then it registered. She thought of the ibuprofen at Bartell Drugs. She did not let her face move. Crispin began to read. The legal language flowed over her like a river of small, clean stones. To the University of Pennsylvania, $12 million. To Stanford, $8 million. To the Cornelius Vandermeer Center for Real Estate Strategy at Northwestern, $15 million. To the maintenance of 3 private yachts berthed in Seattle, Newport, and Antigua ongoing trust provisions. To the third wife and surviving spouse, Octavia Vandermeer, the Madison Park Estate, the Antigua property, the contents of all art collections, and $42 million in cash. Lavinia listened. She did not interrupt. The reading went on. Endowments, fellowships, the Vandermeer wing at a private hospital in Tacoma. A bequest of $2 million to a country club in Bellevue, where her father had played golf with the same 4 men every Saturday for 26 years. A bequest of $100,000 to the housekeeper, a woman named Rosalind Whitcomb, who had worked for him for 31 years and who had once, when Lavinia was 9, hidden Lavinia behind a laundry hamper to give her a slice of birthday cake her father had said she could not have. Lavinia would track Rosalind down a year later and double that bequest. She did not know that yet, but she would. Then Crispin paused. She watched a small smile begin at the corner of his mouth. The smile did not warm. The smile spread and stayed cool, and Lavinia understood with the certainty of a teacher who had watched 40 years of children try to lie to her that this man had been waiting for this paragraph all morning. "To my only biological daughter, Lavinia, Crispin read, "Who so self-righteously rejected my life's work to wallow with the impoverished, I leave a fitting inheritance." He looked up. His eyes met hers. "I bequeath to her the entirety of the Bluebird Cascade Motor Lodge located at the southern edge of Sage Ridge, New Mexico on the original alignment of U.S. Route 66. May she find comfort in the squalor she so desperately sought." He closed the folder. The room was very quiet. Lavinia did not move for a long moment. She listened to her own pulse in her ears. Then she said very softly, and Crispin smiled. He was enjoying this. "The Bluebird Cascade has been condemned since 2004. 22 years. The roof of the central pavilion collapsed in a winter storm in 2009. There is substantial black mold. The clock tower is structurally unsound. The county of Catron has issued a final demolition order. The property must be reduced to grade by the 28th of December, or you will incur a fine of $50,000. He slid a sheet of paper across the table, then a pen. A Mont Blanc, black resin, gold nib, the kind of pen that cost more than Posey's last hospital visit. "This is a quit-claim deed," Crispin said. His voice had softened into something he thought was kindness. "It transfers ownership to a shell entity managed by our firm. We will absorb the demolition costs. You will be released from all liability. You can walk out of this building today and pretend none of this ever happened." Lavinia looked at the pen. She looked at the deed. She looked at the man, a door in her head. A small door she had not opened in many decades swung open. The door belonged to a classroom on Beacon Avenue in 1986, and in that classroom a child had once handed her a forged permission slip, with the same kind of false sincerity she now saw in Bartholomew Crispin's eyes. A man who billed $1,300 an hour did not absorb a $50,000 demolition cost. Not for a homeless widow, not for a stranger, not ever. She did not pick up the pen. She picked up the deed, the original, her name on it. The signature of her father looped and steep and shaking a little at the end, the way the signatures of dying men do. She folded it. Once, twice, she slid it into the inner pocket of her cardigan next to the $3. "No," she said. Crispin's smile froze. "I'm sorry," he said. "What?" "I said no. Mrs. Bromwell, it's mine." She stood. The arthritis screamed in her left hip, and she did not let it show in her face. "My father gave it to me. I'm keeping it." "You are living in a van, Mrs. Bromwell." "I'm aware. You cannot afford the demolition." "Then I won't demolish it." "You cannot afford to live there." "Then I'll live there anyway." Crispin rose. His hands flattened against the table. His voice, when it came again, was a different voice. It had teeth in it. "Mrs. Bromwell, you are being extremely foolish." "Mr. Crispin." She turned at the door. "I taught fifth grade for 38 years. I have been condescended to by people much more talented than you." She walked out. She made it as far as the elevator bank before her hands began to shake. She pressed the button. She waited. She watched her reflection in the polished steel of the elevator door. The reflection of an old woman with a worn cardigan and a folded deed against her chest, and she did not recognize this woman because this woman had a spine. The elevator dinged. She stepped in. A hand caught the door before it could close. A woman stepped inside, tall, blonde, 38 years old, a camel coat that draped the way only very expensive cashmere drapes. A scent. Something French. Something white and sharp and floral. The door slid shut. The elevator began to descend. "Lavinia," the woman said. She did not look at Lavinia. She watched the floor numbers count down. "I'm Octavia, your stepmother." "I know." "Of course you do. You're younger than I thought." "Everyone says that." The elevator dropped. 61, 60, 59. "You should have signed the deed," Octavia said. "Should I?" "Bart's an idiot. He overplayed his hand. I told him not to." "Did you?" 55:54. Octavia turned. Her eyes were the color of a swimming pool in February, cold and very clean. I'll pay you $80,000 in cash for the deed. By tomorrow morning. You walk away. You get an apartment. You take care of those children. Lavinia did not look at her. She watched the floor numbers fall. 80,000, Octavia said, versus a building that is going to bankrupt you with fines before Christmas. Be reasonable, Lavinia. 48. He cheated on your mother for 20 years, you know. Lavinia did not move. He cheated on his second wife, too. He cheated on me. He was a vicious old man, and he handed you a worthless ruin as a final insult, and I'm offering you a way out. $80,000. Cash, no questions. The elevator slowed. 41. 40. Why, Lavinia said. Octavia did not answer. Why, Lavinia said again. Are you and Bartholomew Crispin both so desperate to buy a worthless ruin from a homeless old woman? Octavia's mouth opened, then closed. The elevator dinged at the 38th floor. A man in a suit started to step in. He took one look at the two of them and stepped back out. The doors closed again. You're competing, Lavinia said, quietly, almost to herself. You and Crispin, you're not working together. You don't understand high finance. I understand teachers' lounges. They're the same. The lobby came up. The doors opened. Octavia stepped out first. She did not look back. Lavinia stood in the elevator a moment longer. She breathed in. She breathed out. Then she stepped into the marble lobby of her father's law firm for the first and last time in her life. And she walked through it the way a woman walks through a museum of things she will never own. She did not look at the orchids. She did not look at the receptionist. She walked out into the gray Seattle afternoon, and the $3 in her cardigan pocket touched her hip with every step, and the deed touched her chest, and somewhere south of her in a town she had never seen. A clock tower stood with its hand stopped at 2:47. She walked back to the van. It took her an hour. Her hip was worse than usual. She stopped twice on the sidewalk to lean against a building wall and breathe through the pain. A young woman in a green wool coat asked her if she was all right. Lavinia said yes, thank you. The young woman did not believe her. The young woman opened her wallet and pulled out a $20 bill and folded it small and pressed it into Lavinia's hand and walked away before Lavinia could refuse. Lavinia did not refuse. She stood with the $20 bill in her arthritic hand. She thought about how the world is full of strangers who give $20 to strangers in the rain. She thought about how easy it would be to forget that. She put the 20 into her cardigan pocket. She kept walking. The children were waiting. Marin was the first to look up. Marin always was. What did he leave you, Aunt Vinny? Lavinia climbed into the driver's seat. She closed the door against the cold. She turned in her seat and looked at the four of them. Reeve, Tobin, Marin, Posey still feverish, still small. He left me a motel, she said, in New Mexico. A motel? A condemned one. Reeve looked at her for a long moment. Is it nice? No, sweetheart, it is not nice. Then why are we going? Because two very rich people wanted very badly for me not to. Marin absorbed this. Marin was 14 years old, and she absorbed things like that in the way a sponge absorbs water. That means it's worth something. That means it's worth something. Reeve looked at the gas gauge. Aunt Vinny, we don't have enough fuel. I know. And the radiator. I know. And Posey. I know. Lavinia took the $20 bill out of her cardigan pocket and held it up between two fingers. The bill was crisp, new. Some young woman in a green coat had probably gotten it out of an ATM that morning. She handed it to Reeve. A stranger gave this to me on the sidewalk, she said, 20 minutes ago, for no reason at all. So we are going to act like the world is still capable of strange small mercies, and we are going to drive. She turned the key. The engine coughed. Coughed again. Caught. The old Ford shuddered to life like a horse that has not been ridden in a very long time and was offended to be asked. She put it into gear. "We'll figure it out as we go," she said. "I taught fifth grade. I can figure anything out." They left Seattle at 4:11 in the afternoon. The interstate took them south through the spine of Oregon as the light failed. They slept that first night in a Walmart parking lot in Albany, the van angled between two semi-trucks for warmth. Lavinia counted out 70 cents for a tube of generic children's pain reliever from the night clerk, who had pretended not to see the children sleeping in the back. He had given her the tube anyway. He had been a teacher once, he said. He had recognized the look. By morning, Posey's fever had broken. By noon, they were over the California line. The Ford complained on every grade. The radiator boiled twice between Redding and Red Bluff. Lavinia stood by the side of the road in a thin cardigan as Reeve poured plastic gallon jugs of grocery store water into a steaming engine, and the trucks blew past them at 70, and the wind from the trucks pulled at her hair and at her thin dress, and she did not cry because she had stopped crying many years ago. They ate peanut butter on day-old bread. They ate it for breakfast. They ate it for dinner. Marin made it into a joke. She named the meals. Continental, she called the breakfast one. Bistro, the dinner one. Posey laughed each time. Each laugh was a small, bright coin Lavinia tucked away in some inner pocket she did not know she still had. They crossed into Nevada on the morning of the second day. The land flattened. The land emptied. The land turned the color of old bone. They stopped at a roadside rest area outside Winnemucca. There was a vending machine that took dollar bills. Tobin chose a bag of off-brand corn chips for himself and his brother. Marin chose a granola bar she split with Posey. Lavinia did not choose anything. She stood at the chain-link edge of the rest area and looked east out across the long, flat sweep of high desert, and the wind moved the dry sage. And the dry sage smelled the way memory smelled faintly of a place she had never been but somehow knew. She had never been to New Mexico. Not once in 68 years. Her father had taken her on exactly 2 business trips with him as a child, and both of them had been to Cleveland. She had not known until Crispin had read the deed aloud in the conference room that the Bluebird Cascade existed. 2:47, she thought. The clock tower stopped at 2:47. What had happened at 2:47? She did not know. She wondered if she ever would. They crossed into Arizona on the afternoon of the second day. The Joshua trees came up out of the desert like arms raised in slow prayer. They crossed into New Mexico on the morning of the third day. The old Route 66 alignment ran beside Interstate 40 like a ghost, a cracked black ribbon of asphalt that no maintenance crew had touched since the mid-'80s. Sage Ridge was 12 miles north of the interstate exit. The sign on the off-ramp read Sage Ridge in faded reflective paint, and below it in smaller letters, no services. The blacktop narrowed. The juniper closed in on both sides. The shoulders crumbled into the red dust. Lavinia drove. She did not speak. The children did not speak. They came around a long, slow bend in the road and the world opened. A high mesa, broad and red and flat. Sage and rabbit brush and a single distant ridge of dark blue mountains far to the south. The light at this elevation was different. It was thinner. It was older. It made everything look like it had been carved. And rising out of the floor of that mesa half a mile ahead was the Bluebird Cascade. Lavinia let the van coast. She had read the address on the deed. She had pictured a building. She had pictured a derelict cinderblock courtyard. She had pictured a square little office with a buzzing sign and a cracked driveway. She had not pictured this. A clock tower rose first. 24 meters of pale stucco that had once been the color of buttermilk and was now the color of bones left in the sun. 4 faces, 4 hands. All of them stopped at the same hour, 2:47. Around the tower, like a great purple cloak thrown over the shoulders of a king, climbed an enormous mass of morning glory vine. Wild, untended, 40 years of growth. The vine had eaten the upper third of the tower whole, and the flowers, the small trumpet flowers, were in late autumn bloom, in that vicious mountain purple that only desert mornings know. Below the tower, the main pavilion swept out in a long parabolic curve of reinforced concrete, 200 meters end to end. Its long horizontal bands of stucco moldings rolled across the facade like waves frozen mid-crest. The roof rose and fell like the back of a sleeping animal. Around the main pavilion in a great open fan stood the bungalows, 24 of them, each one a small, streamlined, modern jewel box, each one with its own porthole window and its own curved corner and its own little cantilevered concrete shade canopy over the door. They stood in a perfect arc around what had once been a swimming pool. The pool was a half moon, dry, filled with 40 years of dead juniper needles and tumbleweed, and one sun-bleached child's tricycle that lay on its side in the deep end like a small dead deer. And before all of it, towering over the cracked driveway, stood the great parabolic arch. 12 meters high, reinforced concrete, the kind of architectural gesture that men in 1937 had thought meant the future. The arch had been painted once in a color the desert had since erased. The bones of it stood naked now against the deep blue sky. And under the arch, mounted on a steel pole 9 meters tall, was the sign. A bluebird. A neon bluebird in mid-dive wings, swept back beak pointed toward the earth. The glass tubes were broken. The wiring hung in loops. The bluebird's left eye was a small, dark crater where a bulb had once been. But the bluebird was diving still. After 89 years, the bluebird was still diving. Lavinia stopped the van. She put it in park. She sat there. For a long time, she did not speak. Marin's voice came from the back, small, awed. "It's beautiful as a mummy of a kingdom." Lavinia turned to look at her niece. Marin was leaning forward between the seats. Her eyes were huge. Her eyes had not been that big since before her mother died. "It is," Lavinia said. "Aunt Vinnie, we're going to live there." "Yes, in that. In that." Reeve beside her looked at the clock tower. He looked at the morning glory vine. He looked at the parabolic arch and the diving neon bluebird. "They call it the drowned crown," he said. "How do you know?" "I read it in the file." He held up a sheet of paper. "The Town Historical Society named it that, because of the vine on the tower. They say it looks like a king's crown sinking into a sea." Lavinia looked again at the tower. The vine, the purple flowers, the slow drowning of the white stucco crown. Yes, she drove the van forward slowly beneath the arch. The bluebird cascade swallowed them in the way old places swallow people, not with menace, with patience. The patience of a building that has stood empty for 22 years and has been waiting. She drove the van around the dry half-moon of the swimming pool. She drove past bungalow after bungalow. The windows were broken in 19 of them. Doors hung from one hinge in 12 of them. The desert had begun to take the floors back. Juniper saplings grew through the concrete steps of bungalow 11. A barn owl rose from the open doorway of bungalow 19 and beat its slow, soft wings out over the mesa and was gone. She stopped the van in front of bungalow 7. The door of bungalow 7 still hung straight. The porthole window of bungalow 7 was unbroken. The curved corner of the stucco was cracked and weather-streaked, but it had not fallen. "This one," Lavinia said. They unloaded the van. They took the sleeping bags. They took the cooler with the last of the peanut butter and the last of the bread. They took the flashlight and the gallon jug of water. They took Posey asleep again, breathing slow and even against the small fever that had not fully gone. Bungalow 7 smelled of dust and dry rot and the very faint sweetness of something that had been left in a cupboard for 40 years and had forgotten what it had been. Lavinia swept the floor with a broom from the van. She unrolled the sleeping bags. She arranged the children in a small, careful row against the back wall away from the porthole window. Reeve started a small fire in the metal trash bin he had dragged in from the courtyard. He fed it with dry juniper branches. The smoke curled out the broken transom over the door. The sun set behind the western mountains. The sky turned the color of bruised peaches. The sky turned the color of slow-poured wine. The sky turned the color of the inside of a closing eye. The desert cold came down. Lavinia sat in the doorway of Bungalow 7 and watched the dark fill the cracked half-moon of the empty pool. Marin came and sat beside her. Marin did not speak for a long time. She had her sketchbook open on her knee. She was drawing the parabolic arch, the way the curves of it caught the last red light of the day, the way the bluebird's wings were silhouetted against the bruised sky. "Aunt Vinny?" "Yes, sweetheart." "I don't think we should leave." Lavinia looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean even after we have a real house. I think we should not leave this place. I think we should fix it." "Sweetheart, I know it sounds crazy, I know it's broken, but I think we could fix it." Lavinia looked at her 14-year-old niece, at the architecture magazine pages folded into the back cover of the sketchbook, at the careful pencil lines of the parabolic arch. "Let's see what tomorrow looks like," Lavinia said, "and then the day after that." Myron nodded. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. She had said the things she had come outside to say. The cell phone in Lavinia's pocket buzzed. She had forgotten she still had a signal. She pulled it out. The cheap prepaid screen lit her face with a small, cold rectangle of light. Unknown number. 11:47 p.m. She thumbed it open. "Lavinia?" "Crispin. I had to call your service to find this number. You really should answer your home line more often." "I don't have a home line." A pause. "I see. Lavinia, listen. I've been doing some negotiating on your behalf. I have a private buyer. He's willing to pay you $10,000 in cash tomorrow morning. He wants the lot for storage. I can be in Sage Ridge by 8 a.m. with the paperwork and a cashier's check." Lavinia held the phone away from her face for a moment. She looked out across the dark courtyard. She looked at the clock tower under its drowning crown of morning glory. She looked at the great parabolic arch and the diving neon bluebird black against a sky now full of stars. Two very rich people had wanted very badly for her not to come here. "Mr. Crispin," she said. "Yes. You told me this property would cost $50,000 to demolish." A pause. "That's correct. Why would a private buyer pay me $10,000 for a lot and then pay $50,000 to clear it in a ghost town with no water rights, no power, no services, and 80 miles to the nearest highway interchange?" "It's a tax write-off, Lavinia." "That's what you said yesterday." A longer pause. "Lavinia, I am trying to help you." "No, you are not." "Lavinia." She hung up. She sat very still. She watched the screen of the phone go dark. A pair of headlights flickered briefly far down the cracked old road. She lifted her eyes. She looked out past the diving bluebird, past the arch, down to where the road curved into the juniper. A black SUV was parked in the trees, half a mile away. No closer than that. No farther. Its headlights had blinked once. Just once. As if to confirm something, or to signal something. Then the headlights went out. Lavinia did not move. She watched the dark place in the juniper where the SU-5 had been. It was still there. She could feel it. Royce Mitford had driven all the way from Seattle. He had been behind them the whole time. He was here now. Lavinia closed her hand around the cell phone. She closed her hand around the $3. She closed her hand around the deed folded inside her cardigan. Behind her in the dark of Bungalow 7, Posey stirred in her sleep, and Reeve fed another juniper branch to the small fire in the trash bin, and Marin whispered something to Tobin that Lavinia could not hear. Lavinia Bromwell, 68 years old, sat in the doorway of a condemned motor lodge under a drowning crown in a town no map remembered, and for the first time in 8 months, she did not feel afraid. She felt awake. She felt the way she had felt the first day she had ever stood in front of a classroom of 30 squirming 9-year-olds before any of them had learned her name, before any of them had learned that she would not break. The desert wind moved across the mesa. The morning glory vines on the clock tower stirred. And in the still air, very faint, very far away, Lavinia could have sworn she heard the small dry click of an old mechanism somewhere deep inside the tower trying very slowly to remember how to turn. She did not sleep. She had not expected to. She sat in the doorway of Bungalow 7 and watched the dark place in the juniper where the SUV had been. She watched it for 2 hours. The headlights did not come on again. The SUV did not move. Royce Mitford was a patient man, and Royce Mitford had been paid to sit in a black car at the edge of a ghost town and wait. Lavinia thought about that. She thought about how much you had to pay a man to do nothing for 6 hours in a freezing desert. She thought about what kind of thing was hidden in a building that justified that fee. The desert cold pressed in around her cardigan. Her arthritic hands curled inside her sleeves. She watched the stars wheel slowly above the great parabolic arch, and the diving neon bluebird stood black against the wheel of stars like a bird shot mid-flight and frozen there. By 3 in the morning, she had done the arithmetic. Crispin had told her demolition would cost $50,000. The man had offered her a $10,000 buyout. That left a buyer paying $60,000 for a half-acre of cracked concrete in a town with no water rights, no power grid connection, and no economic future. No tax write-off worked that way. No private investor worked that way. Whatever lived inside the Bluebird Cascade was worth more than $60,000. A great deal more. She thought about her father. She thought about his hands. She thought about the leather of his briefcase and the way he had carried it everywhere, even into rooms where it did not belong. Cornelius Vandermeer had not kept a single piece of property he could not extract money from. Not one. He had sold his own boyhood home in Tacoma the year his mother died. He had sold his first wife's piano the day after the divorce was final. He had held this motel for 22 years. He had paid the property taxes. He had paid the back fees on the county lien. He had refused to sell. He had refused to demolish. He had been hiding something. Lavinia stood. Her hips screamed at her. She let it scream. She went back into Bungalow 7. The fire in the trash bin had burned down to a small orange eye. The children slept in their row against the back wall. Reeve was on his side, one arm thrown protectively across Tobin. Marin slept with her cheek pressed to the rolled-up sleeve of her sweater. Posey slept inside the curve of Lavinia's old wool blanket, and her forehead was cool now, and the fever was gone. Lavinia knelt beside Reeve. She put her hand on his shoulder. He woke instantly. 17 years of being the man of a family had taught him to wake fast. "Aunt Vinnie, I need you," she whispered. "Bring the tire iron." He did not ask why. He pulled on his shoes in the dark and followed her out. They crossed the courtyard. The dry half-moon of the pool yawned to their left. The morning glory vine on the clock tower whispered very faintly in the wind. They walked under the great parabolic arch and turned right along the long, curved front of the main pavilion until they came to the door of the manager's office. The door hung from one hinge. The glass was gone. Lavinia stepped through. The flashlight made a small yellow circle on the floor. The office had been beautiful once. She could see that. A long curved counter ran the length of the back wall, faced in green bakelite that had cracked but not crumbled. Behind the counter, a wall of pigeonhole mail slots in dark walnut, each slot numbered in faded gold leaf. 1 through 24. The bungalow numbers. The brass key hooks below each slot were empty. The keys had been taken in 2004 by whoever had locked the place for the last time and never returned. The floor was a slow drift of old paper and broken plaster and the brittle bodies of dead crickets. Lavinia stood in the center of the office and turned slowly. The flashlight made the shadows on the walls climb and fall. "What are we looking for?" Reeve whispered. "I'll tell you when I see it." She had taught 5th grade for 38 years. She had learned a long time ago that you find lost things by paying attention to what doesn't fit. A clean spot on a dusty desk. A pen out of its drawer. A book replaced upside down. The world tells you where the secrets are if you have the patience to ask. She walked along the back wall. She ran her hand along the edge of the long counter. She looked at the floor. She looked at the ceiling. She stopped at the south wall. The wall was made of plaster, like the other walls, but the plaster of the south wall had been applied differently. The trowel marks ran horizontally, not vertically. The cornice molding stopped 6 inches short of the corner. The paint was newer. Not new, just newer. 40 years instead of 60. This wall, she said quietly. Reeve came beside her. He looked at it. It's just a wall, Aunt Vinny. It's the wrong wall. She tapped the plaster with her knuckle. It made a flat sound. She moved her hand 6 inches to the right and tapped again. The sound changed. Tighter, denser, like knocking on a refrigerator instead of a closet door. Steel, she whispered. Reeve heard it too. His eyes went wide. Aunt Vinny. Get the tire iron. He brought it. She took it from him with her good hand. She set the chisel end against the seam where the plaster met the molding. She raised her arm. She brought it down. The plaster cracked. She struck again. A chunk fell. A puff of white dust rose. Reeve coughed. Let me, he said. No. Her voice was very quiet. I want to do this myself. She struck again and again. The plaster came away in great soft chunks, the way old plaster does when it has been waiting decades to be released. White dust floated in the beam of the flashlight. The wall behind the plaster was not wall, it was metal. Cold gray, dimpled, industrial. A vault. She kept striking until she had cleared a panel the size of a small window. The vault door stood revealed in the flashlight beam. Reinforced steel, 5 inches thick at the edge, painted gray with a faint sheen of dust. A digital keypad was set into the upper right of the door. The display was dead. The batteries had given up years ago. But beneath the digital keypad set deep into the steel were two mechanical locks. Two, side by side, each of them a heavy cylinder of brass recessed into the steel. The keyways were oddly shaped, old, hand-cut, the kind of locks no modern locksmith made anymore. Lavinia lowered the tire iron. 2 locks, Reeve breathed. 2 locks. She stood in front of the vault, her hand on the cold steel. Her own breath made a small white cloud in the flashlight beam. Behind her, Reeve said, "Where do we find the keys?" She thought of her father. She thought of the man who had taught her at 7 years old how to read the patterns of geese flying south. The man who had hidden Easter eggs for her in the joints of bookcases and the hollow underside of chair legs. He had been a cruel man. He had been a vicious old man. But he had been her father once, a long time ago, before the money had eaten him. She turned. She walked back into the small ruined office. She let the flashlight crawl across the framed pictures still hanging crooked on the south and east walls. The frames were warped from 40 years of New Mexico dry heat. Most of the photographs had faded to white, but she stopped at one near the southeast corner, almost behind a tipped-over filing cabinet. A small black frame. The glass was cracked. The photograph behind the glass was a Kodachrome from 1965. A young man in a sharp gray suit stood in front of the Bluebird Cascade. The neon Bluebird above his head was lit. The clock tower was clean white stucco. The bungalow doors were painted bright turquoise. A little girl in a yellow sundress held the man's hand. Her hair was in 2 braids. She was missing a front tooth. She was smiling up at her father with the whole of her face. Lavinia had not seen this photograph in 61 years. She lifted the frame off the wall. The nail came out of the rotten plaster with a small dry sound. She turned the frame over. Taped to the cardboard backing with the brittle yellow tape of 40 years ago was a heavy brass key, and folded under the key, a small piece of paper. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was her father's, steeper than she remembered, older, but still his. The world saw garbage. You always saw the soul. Look deeper, Vinny. She stood in the dark of the ruined office and held the photograph of herself at 7 years old and the key and the note her dying father had hidden behind her own face. Her hand trembled. Her chest hurt. She did not let herself cry. She had not cried in 8 months, and she was not going to start now in a building full of cricket bodies. She slid the note into the pocket of her cardigan. She put the key in her palm. It was the right size for one of the mechanical locks on the vault. She walked back to the steel door. She slid the brass key into the left-hand lock. It fit. She turned it. The lock clicked. Beneath her hand, deep in the door, a tumbler dropped. She tried the second lock with the same key. It did not fit. The keyway was different, shaped like a long teardrop. Whoever had made these locks had wanted two different keys, two different people, two different secrets. She stood back. "One down," Reeve whispered. "One to go." By dawn, she had walked into the town of Sage Ridge. It was 3 miles down the cracked old highway. The walk took her 90 minutes because her hip would not cooperate, and because she stopped twice to rest on the running board of a derelict 1958 Chevy pickup that had been abandoned in a ditch sometime in the Reagan administration. The sun came up over the eastern mesa and made the red dust of the road glow like a long line of coals. Sage Ridge was a row of 9 buildings on a single street: a boarded-up Texaco, a dry goods store, a post office the size of a tool shed, a church with a hand-lettered sign that read "Services Suspended," a diner that was closed, and at the far end the only place with a light on a general store with a hand-painted sign over the door. "Bergstrom's." She pushed the door. A small brass bell rang. The store was warm. The store smelled of coffee and wood smoke and the dry sweetness of old peppermint candy. A woman stood behind the counter, 79 years old, tall, thin as a willow switch. Her white hair was braided in a long rope down her back. She wore a red plaid wool shirt and a string of small turquoise beads. Her hands were spotted with the freckles of a lifetime of high-altitude sun. She looked up when the bell rang. She looked at Lavinia. She looked at Lavinia for a long second. Then she went very still. "Oh, sweet Lord," the old woman whispered. "You have his eyes." Lavinia stopped just inside the door. "I'm sorry. His eyes." The old woman came around the counter. Her hands were trembling. "You have your father's eyes." Lavinia did not know what to say. The old woman stopped 2 feet from her. She looked at Lavinia's face with the desperate, hungry stare of someone who has waited a very long time to see a ghost. "You're Lavinia," she said. "How did you—" "I'm Liesel Bergstrom. I knew you when you were 6 years old." Lavinia stared. "I worked at the Cascade," Liesel said, "from 1964 to 1969. I was the assistant manager. I cleaned the bungalows. I changed the linens on Sundays. Your father brought you out here twice a year, spring and fall. You were the most serious little girl I ever met." Lavinia's throat closed. She had no memory of this woman. None at all. She had been 7 years old. Memory at 7 is a thing of bright pieces, not whole rooms. But she had a memory of a tall, thin woman in a red apron who had let her count out pennies behind a desk while her father did business in a back office. And she had a memory of being given a stick of striped peppermint candy at the end of those long mornings and being told, "You'll be a smart one. You watch." She had not thought of either of those memories in 58 years. "You work there," she said. Her voice was very thin. "Until the day he closed it down." "Why did he close it?" Liesel looked at her for a long moment. Then Liesel gestured to a small round table in the back of the store beside a cast-iron wood stove. "Sit," Liesel said. "I'll make coffee." Lavinia sat. The coffee came in a chipped white mug. Liesel sat across from her. The bell on the door did not ring again. The store was empty. There was no one to come in. Liesel looked at the mug. She did not look at Lavinia. "He bought the place in 1964, Liesel said. "I was 17 years old. I'd been working as the front desk girl for the previous owner, a man named Halverson, who'd been losing money for years. The interstate had killed Route 66. Nobody stopped at motels on the old road anymore. They wanted the fast lane. When your father bought the place, he kept me on and gave me the assistant manager title within a year. He said he liked that I noticed things. She lifted her coffee. She set it down without drinking. Your father bought it for cash, $142,000. I remember the number because I typed the receipt. He never advertised. He never lowered the rates. He did not want guests. Some weekends he'd have 2 rooms full out of 24, and he'd be furious if even those showed up. After the first year, he stopped renting at all. He just paid me and a janitor and a maintenance man and kept the doors open. Why? Liesel shook her head. At first I didn't know. I thought it was a tax thing, a loss carry forward, some kind of real estate strategy. He was very rich already, your father. I knew that. Everyone in the county knew that. Liesel looked at her. But then I started noticing. Noticing what? He'd come out 4 or 5 times a year, always alone, always with a suitcase, a metal one, heavy. He could barely carry it from the car to the manager's office. I helped him once in 1967. It was so heavy I nearly dropped it. He yelled at me. He told me never to touch his luggage again. Lavinia's hands had gone very still around the coffee mug. He'd lock himself in the manager's office for hours. The door was always locked, and when he came out, the suitcase was lighter, sometimes empty. He'd leave the same day and drive back to Seattle. He never spent a night in the building, not once in all the years I knew him. What was in the suitcase? Liesel shook her head. I don't know. I never knew. He'd always look at me on the way out, and he'd say the same thing. He'd say, Liesel, you're a wonderful manager, and you have a wonderful memory, and you must promise me you have a terrible memory for some things. She looked at Lavinia. I promised him I did. Why are you telling me now? Because 3 months ago a man came into the store. Liesel set down her mug. Her face had gone hard. A young man, 40 years old, beautiful suit, charcoal coat. He came in and he bought a bottle of water and he asked me very politely about the Bluebird Cascade. He asked me if I'd ever worked there. He asked me what I remembered. What did you tell him? Nothing. I am very good at remembering nothing. Liesel's mouth was thin. He left. But 2 days later, my grandson Henrik in Albuquerque got a phone call from a man who would not give a name. The man said he understood Henrik was opening a small auto body shop on Central Avenue. The man said it would be terrible if the building were to suffer a fire. The man said he hoped Henrik's grandmother in Sage Ridge would have nothing to say about old motels. Lavinia closed her eyes. Bartholomew Crispin, she said. That was the name on the card he left. I'm sorry, Liesel. Don't be sorry. Henrik moved his shop. He's fine. But I want you to know something. She leaned forward. Her old hand, the spotted one, closed around Lavinia's good hand. Your father was a cruel man. I don't say that lightly. I watched him be cruel to people for 4 years. But whatever he hid in that motel, he hid it because he was afraid of what other people would do with it. And the people who are afraid of you finding it are exactly the people he was afraid of. Lavinia opened her eyes. Did he ever, she said, carefully, did he ever say anything to you about a key? Liesel looked at her. A brass key, about this long, with a teardrop bow. Liesel's eyes changed. He used to wear one on a chain around his neck, she said, under his shirt. I saw it once. He was changing his coat in the manager's office. He saw me see it. He buttoned his shirt back up. He never wore it visible again. What did the teardrop key open? I don't know. Lavinia squeezed Liesel's hand. Thank you, she said. There's more. Lavinia waited. He loved that clock tower, Liesel said. He used to climb it. Every visit, he'd be up there for hours. I always thought it was strange. There's nothing up there. Just gears and a small platform and the 4 faces of the clock. But he'd climb up. He'd come down covered in dust. He'd say nothing about it. Lavinia thought. She thought about the tower, the pale stucco, the drowning crown of morning glory. The four faces stopped at 247. She thought about a man who had loved a clock tower. She thought about a brass key on a chain around a neck. Liesel, she said, did he ever go into the tower with the suitcase? No, the suitcase always went into the manager's office. But the brass key around his neck, the teardrop one. Liesel nodded slowly. He always touched it before he climbed the tower stairs, she said. I never thought about it until just now, but he did, every time. Lavinia let go of Liesel's hand. She stood up. I have to go back, she said. Lavinia. She turned at the door. Yes. Be careful, the man with the charcoal coat. He has not stopped watching. He has people. I would not be surprised if he is on his way already. He is, Lavinia said. He's been parked half a mile from the motel since last night. Liesel looked at her for a long moment. Then Liesel reached under the counter and pulled out a small object wrapped in a red cotton handkerchief. She held it out. Lavinia unwrapped it. A folding pocket knife. Pearl handle. Old. Sharp. It was my husband's, Liesel said. He died in 2011. He used to say a woman alone in a desert should never carry less than her wits in a sharp blade. Lavinia closed her hand around the knife. Then Liesel reached under the counter again. This time she came up with a small object the size of a deck of cards. A battered old Nokia flip phone, the kind nobody had used in 15 years. She slid a fresh prepaid SIM card across the counter beside it. I bought this for Henrik 6 years ago, she said. He never came to pick it up. There's 1,100 minutes on the SIM card. The number's taped to the back of the phone. You give this to that nephew of yours when he comes into town for bread tomorrow. You tell him to keep it on his body switched on all the time until this whole thing is finished. You understand me, Lavinia? I understand. Some things go wrong in the desert at 2 in the morning. You want a second phone. The sheriff's department here is small, 3 deputies, but they answer the phone. Thank you, Liesel. Go on, walk back fast as you can, and keep that knife where you can reach it. Lavinia closed her hand around the pearl handle of the pocket knife and slid the Nokia into her cardigan pocket and walked out of Bergstrom's into the cold morning sun. She walked back to the Bluebird Cascade. The walk took her 70 minutes. She moved faster than she had on the way out. The arthritis in her hip protested. She ignored it. She had learned a long time ago that the body would do almost anything if the mind refused to negotiate. When she came up the road and saw the great parabolic arch rising against the noon sun with the diving bluebird black against the sky, she felt a thing she had not expected to feel. Recognition. The building knew her. She walked under the arch. She walked across the cracked driveway. She walked past the dry pool. She passed Bungalow 7 and saw through the porthole window that the children were awake. Marin was reading her architecture magazine. Tobin was repairing something on the stove with a wrench Reeve must have found in the office. Posey was drawing on a piece of cardboard with a piece of charcoal from last night's fire. Lavinia did not stop. She walked to the base of the clock tower. The door at the base of the tower was wooden. Once it had been painted turquoise. Now it was the color of old bone and split halfway up the grain. There was no lock. The lock had rusted out decades ago. She pushed. The door opened with a small, dry groan. A spiral staircase rose into the dim, dust-filled column of the tower. The stairs were iron, riveted. The kind of iron staircase a man in 1937 would have welded with pride. She climbed. Her hips screamed. She let it. She had carried 4 children from Seattle to the New Mexico desert in a dying Ford, and she would carry herself up a staircase if she had to. She climbed, and the light from the 4 broken clock faces filtered down through the dust in long, slanting white bars. Pigeons had nested in the rafters and were gone now, leaving only feathers and the smell of guano and the deep, ancient quiet of an empty space at the top of an empty thing. She reached the top platform. The mechanism was there. The great central gear, the brass and iron interlock of cogs and weights. the pendulum motionless, the drive shafts that ran out to each of the four clock faces, everything coated in 89 years of dust. She stood on the platform. She turned slowly. She thought of her father, 60 years old, standing exactly where she was standing now, touching his shirt, touching the brass key on its chain, looking at this mechanism. She walked around the gear housing. She ran her hand along the iron of the central column. On the north face of the column, set 6 inches above the platform floor, almost invisible under the dust, was a small brass plate. Engraved. She knelt. The arthritis screamed. She let it scream. She wiped the dust away. The plate read Maintenance Access. There was a teardrop-shaped keyhole below the engraving. Lavinia closed her eyes. She breathed out. Then she stood and she climbed back down the spiral stairs, and she crossed the courtyard, and she walked into Bungalow 7 where her 4 children looked up at her at once. She handed the Nokia and the prepaid SIM and the slip of paper with the number on it to Reeve. "From Liesel Bergstrom in town," she said. "You install the SIM. You keep this phone on your body at all times until this is over. Switched on, charged. Do you understand?" Reeve nodded once. He took the phone. He had it open and the SIM installed in under 30 seconds. His hands had been good at small things since he was 9 years old. "Aunt Vinny." "Yes." "What is this for?" "It's for if everything goes wrong." He did not argue. "Reeve, Tobin, bring the flashlight." The three of them went back up the tower. It took Lavinia a long time. The stairs in late afternoon were harder than the stairs in noon. Reeve climbed behind her in case she fell. Tobin climbed ahead with the flashlight. When they reached the platform, Lavinia knelt again before the brass plate. The teardrop key. She did not have it, but she knew where her father had kept it. 60 years ago, on a chain around his neck, under his shirt. She thought of the photograph she had found behind the frame. The little girl in the yellow sundress holding her father's hand. The man in the sharp gray suit. The little brass chain that had hung at his collar. She thought about how a man hides a thing. He hides it the way he hid the first key, behind something that looks like nothing. She looked at the iron column, at the brass plate, at the 4 motionless clock faces above. "Tobin," she said, "shine the light on the inside of the south face." Tobin lifted the flashlight. The beam crawled across the great curving back of the south clock, faced the place no one would ever see, the place visible only to whoever climbed the tower from the inside. There was something taped to the back of the face. Yellow tape. 42 years old. A small flat envelope. Tobin lifted it off with the careful fingers of a 15-year-old who had learned to be careful with everything. He brought it to her. Lavinia opened the envelope. Inside was a key. Brass, teardrop bow. The exact shape of the keyway in the maintenance plate at her feet. And folded behind the key a single sheet of paper. Heavy stock. Her father's handwriting. "Vinny, if you are reading this, I am dead and Octavia has won. I did not trust the banks. I did not trust the lawyers. I trusted you. 2 keys, 2 locks. Do not open it alone. Bring the one you trust most. I am sorry, Vinny. I am sorry for everything. The world saw garbage. You always saw the soul." Lavinia held the paper in her shaking hands. She read it twice. Then she folded it. She slid it into the pocket of her cardigan next to the first note, next to the $3 she had carried out of Seattle. She slid the teardrop key into the maintenance plate at her feet. She turned it. A tumbler dropped. Somewhere far below them, deep in the building, a small dry mechanism shifted. She stood up. She looked at Reeve. "We have both keys now. What do they open?" "The same door, 2 locks, both at the same time." Reeve looked at her. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight." They climbed back down the spiral stairs of the tower. The sun was setting over the western mountains. The mesa burned. The sky turned the long, slow gold of October afternoons in the high desert. The bluebird's broken wings stood black against the gold sky. Lavinia spent the rest of the daylight teaching. 40 years of fifth-grade lesson plans had not gone to waste. She gathered the 4 children in Bungalow 7. She sat on the dust-streaked floor with her bad hips stretched out beside her. She spoke quietly. "I need you to listen to me," she said. They listened. "Tonight," she said, "some men are going to come here. They are bad men. They want the building. They will not hurt you if I do what they say. But I am not going to do what they say." Marin's mouth moved, then closed, then opened. "Are we going to die, Aunt Vinny?" "No, sweetheart. We are not going to die. We are going to be smart." She took the prepaid cell phone out of her pocket, the original one, the cheap one she had carried out of Seattle. She handed it to Reeve. "This phone has a voice recorder application," she said. "Marin showed me how to use it. Look." Marin leaned forward. Marin had been the family's technology officer since she was 8. Marin had figured out how to set up Verity's old laptop the year Verity died. Marin had taught Lavinia how to use the prepaid texting menu within a week of getting the phone. Marin, who folded magazine pages and dreamed of the Chrysler Building, had hands that understood everything small and electronic and difficult. Marin reached over and pressed the recorder icon. A red circle. The microphone glowed. "It's recording us right now," Marin said. "What do we do with it?" Reeve said. "You hide it in the manager's office, tucked into the pocket of my cardigan. I will be wearing it. I will draw them into the office. I will keep them talking." "What about us?" "You take the children, all 3 of them. You go out the back of Bungalow 7. You cross the courtyard low, and you go behind the eastern bungalows, and you reach the juniper trees. You hide there. You stay hidden no matter what you hear. You do not come out." She looked at Reeve. "You have the Nokia from Liesel in your pocket. You wait until you see their headlights coming up the road. Not before. The moment you see headlights, you call 911 from the juniper. You tell them everything. You give them the address. You tell them 3 bulldozers and armed men are coming to demolish a property occupied by your family. You tell them you are 17 years old. You stay on the line as long as they ask you to." Reeve looked at her for a long moment. "Aunt Vinny?" "Yes? I don't want to leave you." "I know, but I taught you to listen to me." "So you are going to listen." She turned to Tobin. "Tobin, the digital camera Verity bought you for your 12th birthday. Do you still have it?" He nodded. "It still works," he said. His voice was very small. "I want you to take it. I want you to climb to the porthole window of Bungalow 7. You will have a clean line of sight across the courtyard to the manager's office. I want you to record video, everything, audio if you can. Hold it steady." Tobin nodded. "Marin," the girl turned her face up. "You are in charge of Posey. You take her hand and you do not let go. You sing to her if you have to. You keep her quiet. You hide her behind the juniper trunks. Posey, sweetheart. Do you understand?" Posey nodded. She was holding the wool blanket against her cheek. "I understand," Posey whispered. "Good girl." Lavinia looked at all of them. "I love you," she said. "All 4 of you. I have loved you since the day I held you at the hospital. I love you now. I will love you tomorrow. We are going to be a family tomorrow." Marin started to cry. She did it silently. Reeve put his arm around her. The sun went down. They waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Lavinia had not realized that the waiting would be the hardest part. She had survived worse things than the next 4 hours, she told herself, and she had survived them, by moving through them, by working at them. The waiting was something else. The waiting was a kind of stretching of time that forced you to sit inside your own fear with no instrument to measure it against. She made tea. She did not know why. She made tea over the small fire in the trash bin with the last of the water in the gallon jug. There were no tea bags. She used a sprig of dried sage Marin had cut from the courtyard. The tea tasted like grass and warm metal. Nobody complained. Tobin tested the camera. The battery was at 87%. He had stolen a wall charger from a Walmart sometime in the past month and used it when he could find an outlet. The memory card had 4 gigabytes free. He set the camera on the windowsill at the angle Lavinia had shown him. He marked the angle in his mind. He turned the camera off to preserve battery and waited. Reeve charged the Nokia from a small hand-crank generator he had built from a flashlight and a salvage motor when he was 13. He had been carrying the generator in his backpack for 2 years. It did not produce much power. It produced enough. Marin held Posey. Posey was very quiet. Posey had taken to quiet the way some children take to noise. She had learned somewhere in the 8 months of the van that volume was a resource that had to be rationed. She did not cry tonight. She had not cried in 2 months. Lavinia took the 2 brass keys from her cardigan pocket and laid them side by side on the dusty windowsill of Bungalow 7. The light from the dying sky touched the brass. The keys gleamed gently. 2 small teardrop bows, one older than the other. Both heavy, both real. They had been hidden by her father in 1984, the year he had cut her out of his life, the year he had stood in his Madison Park library and told her she was dead to him. He had hidden them for her in the same year. He had known he would not be there to give them to her. He had known something even then that she was only beginning to understand. The wind picked up over the mesa. The morning glory vine on the clock tower stirred. Somewhere out beyond the juniper in the dark place 1/2 mile down the cracked old road, Royce Mitford had no doubt called Bartholomew Crispin. The bulldozers were on their way. At 1:53 in the morning, Lavinia and Reeve walked across the courtyard one last time. They went into the manager's office. They stood before the steel vault door. The plaster they had broken out the night before lay in white piles around their feet. Lavinia took the first brass key, the older one, the one from behind the photograph. She slid it into the left-hand lock. She took the teardrop key, the one from inside the clock face. She slid it into the right-hand lock. She looked at Reeve. "Together," she said. "Together," he said. They turned the keys at the same time. 2 tumblers dropped. A great mechanism inside the vault began to move. Slow, heavy, 89 years of stored tension, gears turning, bolts retracting. The door began to open. It opened slowly. 1 inch, 2 inches. A breath of cold, dry, sealed air pushed out into the room, and exactly at that moment, far down the cracked old highway, 3 sets of high beams flickered on at once. Diesel engines turned over, coughed, caught, rumbled. The headlights began to move. They came up the road in a slow line. 3 bulldozers and a black SUV. Bartholomew Crispin was 6 hours early. The headlights came up the road in a slow line, and Lavinia Bromwell stood in the doorway of the manager's office and watched them come. She did not move. She did not breathe quickly. She had been a 5th-grade teacher for 38 years, and she had learned somewhere in the 3rd decade that the worst moment in any room is the moment before you decide what kind of woman you are going to be in it. She decided. She turned to Reeve. He stood behind her with the vault door cracked 1 inch open at his back, the cold, sealed breath of 22 years still curling out into the dust of the broken office. "Now," she said. He did not argue. He had stopped arguing with her at 13. He turned and ran across the dark courtyard, low and fast, and his sneakers made no sound on the cracked concrete, and Lavinia watched him slip into Bungalow 7 through the back window. The diesel engines rumbled closer. She had 90 seconds, maybe less. She crossed back into the vault doorway. She pulled the heavy steel back into place against its frame. Not closed, not locked. Just resting. She kicked the broken plaster against the bottom of it to hide the seam. She wiped the dust from her hands onto her cardigan, and she felt the small, hard rectangle of the prepaid cell phone. In the inner pocket against her ribs, the recorder app still running from when Reeve had set it 3 hours ago, the red dot pulsing faintly through the wool. The microphone angled exactly the way Marin had shown her